Some comic book villains want power, some want revenge, some want money. Chemo wants nothing, because Chemo isn't really a person. He's a living industrial accident, a walking chemical catastrophe born from scientific failure, toxic waste, and humanity's fear that progress itself might poison the world. Welcome back to the channel, everyone, and today we're diving into the history of Chemo, one of DC Comics' most misunderstood villains. But before we begin, we'd appreciate it if you like and subscribe, comment, and share this video out. It really helps out the channel each and every week. Thank you. Chemo first appeared in Showcase number 39 in 1962, created by Robert Canayer, Ross Andrew, and Mike Esposito. His origin story is bizarre, even by Silver Age comic standards. Scientist Ramsey Norton dreams of solving humanity's greatest problems: disease, famine, suffering. But every experiment fails. Instead of disposing of his failed chemical experiments safely, Norton dumps them into a massive humanoid plastic container. Over time, the chemicals mutate, combine, evolve. Eventually, Norton disposes of a volatile plant growth serum into the mix, and this becomes the trigger. The container comes alive. Chemo emerges during a fascinating historical moment. 1962 is deep in the atomic age. Americans were living with fears about radiation, industrial pollution, chemical weapons, and scientific experimentation spiraling out of control. Chemo embodies those anxieties. He's not evil in the traditional sense. He's what happens when human ambition creates something humanity can no longer control. And notice something important about Chemo. He has no real personality, no tragic monologues, no master plan. He's a disaster, an ecological nightmare with legs. And that made Chemo different from most villains of that era. And as Chemo continued appearing in comics, his destructive abilities became increasingly symbolic. Everything around him becomes contaminated. The air, water, entire environments. By the late 1960s and 1970s, environmental fears were growing rapidly in the real world. Industrial waste polluted rivers. Cities were covered in smog. Americans were beginning to understand that technological progress often carried hidden consequences. Then, in Superman number 342 from December of 1979, Chemo becomes part of one of Superman's most unsettling stories. The world's atmosphere suddenly begins making Superman sick, and no one understands why. Fearing for both humanity and himself, Superman isolates himself inside a transparent enclosure, a glass box. People can still see him, but he is separated from the world, from nature, from human contact, even from Lois Lane. This imagery feels deeply connected to the late 1970s environmental anxiety. Invisible contamination had become terrifying. Radiation, polluted air, toxic exposure. Just months earlier, in March of 1979, America experienced the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. Public trust in technological safety was shaken. Now, eventually Superman discovers the truth, that Chemo has returned, and his toxic presence is poisoning the atmosphere itself. But the contamination does more than weaken Superman, it changes him. The toxins slowly transform Superman into something aggressive and brutish. This is important because Chemo doesn't just destroy the body, he corrupts identity. The idea that environmental contamination could alter human behavior reflected the growing fears surrounding chemical exposure and unseen biological damage. We were just beginning to understand how DNA worked and how radiation could affect that as well. Now Superman finally defeats Chemo by launching him into space. The atmosphere clears and Superman returns to himself. But Chemo's return in Superman number 370 from 1982 becomes even more fascinating. A man named Joe Quinn stands on a bridge contemplating suicide. After years of loyal work, his company has replaced him. New chemical technologies make his job obsolete. Retraining him would cost money, so the company simply discards him. This was a reality in America. Economic anxieties in the early 1980s. Automation was running rampant. Technological replacement of human workers was just beginning, and workers and human beings were now becoming disposable. Then Joe looks up as he's standing on the bridge. A comet is coming crashing down, a comet that Superman went up to earlier divert from the Earth's path, but failed. And now that comet is coming down on top of Joe. But it isn't a comet, it's Chemo. the same Chemo Superman launched into space years earlier. Now, with Chemo, Joe, and the polluted water of the river alongside Metropolis, a new Chemo emerges, drastically changed. Now the monster carries human pain, human anger, human resentment. It carries the actual essence of Joe Quinn, as if he's trapped inside the beast. Chemo becomes a fusion of industrial toxicity and economic despair. Superman ultimately separates Joe from Chemo in the end, and Chemo is then destroyed, and Superman convinces the company to retrain Joe rather than discard him. A happy ending for a comic book where that happy ending in reality didn't take place very often. Now, for a brief moment, the story suggests something hopeful, that technology does not have to dehumanize people, but as we've seen in the last 40 years, that isn't the case. And by the time of Crisis on Infinite Earths, Chemo evolves from dangerous monster into apocalyptic weapon. In massive crossover events, characters like Chemo become symbols of uncontrollable destruction. Brainiac and Lex Luthor unleash him on Earth 4's version of New York, and the entire city is devastated. And this is important because as comics became darker in the 1980s, Chemo fit perfectly into stories about mass death and societal collapse. He stops being merely a science fiction monster. He becomes the environmental horror. This imagined horror would become a reality less than 6 months later in April of 1986. In Action Comics number 590 from 1987, Chemo returns in a story that feels eerily tied to real-world industrial disaster fears. Just 1 year earlier, in that April of '86, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster shocked the world. The fear of catastrophic contamination became global. In our story, Clark Kent is touring a chemical processing facility. The company claims it safely recycles dangerous chemicals, but there's something deeply cynical happening. The same industrial system creating the pollution is also profiting from cleaning it up. During the visit, Clark falls into a vat containing chemical residue, recovered from the river where Chemo was destroyed years earlier. Superman's cellular structure reactivates the beast, and a new Chemo is born. This version of the story feels heavily influenced by fears of lingering contamination, the idea that toxic disasters never fully disappear, that residues remain in waiting. The Metal Men join Superman to stop Chemo, but the battle comes with sacrifice. Tin loses his life fighting the monster. Chemo's existence now carries a new implication. Toxicity reproduces itself. Industrial contamination becomes generational. Then came one of the darkest moments in Chemo's history, Infinite Crisis number 4. Chemo is dropped onto the city of Bloodhaven. The result? Catastrophic. Tens of thousands die. The city becomes a poisoned wasteland. This story feels very different from earlier Chemo stories. After 9/11, comic books increasingly reflected the fears of mass casualty events. Entire cities could be erased. Civilization suddenly felt fragile. And Chemo becomes terrifying here precisely because he lacks humanity. You cannot negotiate with toxic fallout. You cannot reason with contamination. And then one of the most interesting interpretations of Chemo appears in Supergirl Volume 4, number 5. The story raises an unsettling question. What if Chemo is suffering himself? Supergirl actually enters Chemo's chemical makeup and realizes that there is something sentient there. For Chemo, he just wants to be alive. He does not project any evil or malice. He is just trying to manage his existence and come to terms with what it means to be alive. Unfortunately, Supergirl has to tell it that he is not alive, in the same sense that he sees humans, and that he never will be. This revelation that he is a lesser, that he was a mistake of creation, causes Chemo great pain and suffering. He self-detonates and turns himself into a rainstorm that is cleansing and peaceful, a final act of contrition by a being who is never allowed to accept his own existence. This changes everything, because suddenly Chemo is no longer just pollution. He may be a living being trapped inside endless toxicity, and that creates a very tragic interpretation. Chemo has now become the victim of humanity's recklessness. And across every era, Chemo reflects one core fear: that humanity creates disasters faster than it can control them. In the 1960s, he reflected fear of scientific contamination. In the 1980s, he became a symbol of large-scale destruction. After 9/11, he represented catastrophic urban annihilation, and in modern comics, Chemo feels disturbingly relevant. And Chemo may look ridiculous at first glance, a giant walking vat of chemicals, but underneath that absurd premise is something deeply concerning, because Chemo is what happens when humanity's waste refuses to stay buried. And that may make Chemo one of the most terrifying monsters DC Comics ever created. Thus ends our look back at Chemo's first appearance, origin story, and subsequent lore. I hope you enjoyed that look back at pop culture and comic book history. I thank you for watching. If you want more pop culture fun, click on the thumbnail at the end of the video for our look back at one of DC's most meaningful villains, Giganta. You'll be glad you did. Until next time, remember I'm still your reluctant gringo from somewhere south of the border. Salud and a huevo.